I saved an Apache widow from a bear trap. Next morning, her people demanded I take her. John had always felt most alive when he was out in the wilderness.
Patient. The forest around the edge of the Apache reservation had been his home for years, a place where the air was fresh, the birds sang early in the morning, and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of animals. He loved the quiet, the feeling that the world was big but still welcoming. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, he would strap on his worn leather boots, fill his backpack with essentials, and set off along the trails that wound through the hills and valleys. He knew every bend in the path, every hidden spring, every rock that jutted out like a jagged tooth from the ground. The forest felt like an old friend, predictable, comforting, yet always full of surprises. That morning, like most, he walked slowly, savoring the soft mist that clung to the trees. The dew made the moss glisten, and the scent of pine mixed with earth made him feel peaceful. Birds fluttered above, hopping from branch to branch, calling to each other with cheerful chirps. John smiled to himself, thinking how lucky he was to live so close to nature, away from the chaos of town life. He had built a small cabin near the edge of the woods. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could live simply and feel free. As he moved deeper into the forest, following a narrow path that curved around a ridge, he suddenly heard a strange, sharp sound. A cry that didn't belong to the normal forest life. It was a scream, short and urgent, full of pain. John stopped immediately, his ears straining to locate it. The cry came again, a little louder this time, and he realized it was human. Something was wrong. Without thinking, he ran toward the sound, jumping over fallen branches and ducking under low-hanging limbs. The trees thickened as he moved, and the forest seemed to hold its breath around him. Finally, he reached a small clearing, and what he saw made him freeze. A woman was trapped in a bear trap. She was struggling, but the metal jaws held her leg tightly. Blood was starting to seep from the wound, staining the earth beneath her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she looked as though she had been trying to free herself for a long time. John's heart pounded, and he took a careful step forward. He knew he had to help, but he also knew how dangerous the trap could be. Rouse. One wrong move, and he could get hurt too, or make her injury worse. Hey, it's okay, he said softly, trying not to startle her. I'm here to help. Don't move. The woman flinched at his voice but didn't scream this time. She seemed too exhausted and too shocked to do anything but watch him carefully. John examined the trap. It was old but strong, and the tension on the metal jaws was still dangerous. He looked around and saw a sturdy branch nearby. Carefully, he lifted it and used it to pry the trap open just enough to free her leg. The woman let out a small, relieved cry as the pressure released. John quickly moved to support her, helping her sit on a nearby rock. Her leg was bleeding badly, and the skin was cut and bruised. "You're going to be okay," he said, pulling a clean cloth from his backpack. He pressed it gently against the wound to stop the bleeding. Breath. She nodded silently, clearly still in shock. John noticed her clothes were torn, and her boots were scuffed and muddy. She had obviously been trying to walk through the forest for some time before she got caught. "Can you tell me your name?" John asked, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Naeli," she whispered. The name sounded soft and melodic, and John repeated it quietly to himself. "Naeli, it's going to be all right. I'll get you out of here safely." He tore a piece of cloth from his shirt to make a temporary bandage and worked carefully, wrapping her leg to protect it. Naeli kept still, only occasionally wincing from the pain. John could see the fear in her eyes, but he also saw a spark of trust forming. She needed him now, and she seemed to understand that he was there to help. After tending to her leg, John realized she needed water and food. He dug into his backpack and found a small water bottle and some jerky he had packed for his hike. He handed them to her slowly. Naeli drank cautiously, sipping the water as if it tasted like hope itself. She took a small piece of jerky, nibbling at it silently. John smiled gently, trying to lighten the mood.
You're safe now. We'll get you back to the cabin, and I'll make sure you're comfortable.
John supported Naeli under her arms, helping her walk carefully through the uneven forest floor. Every step was difficult for her, but she didn't complain. The forest seemed to watch them as they moved, the early morning mist curling around the trees, making everything feel magical and surreal. John spoke quietly to keep her calm, pointing out small things: a squirrel gathering nuts, the sunlight filtering through the branches, the sound of a creek nearby. He wanted her to feel that the forest wasn't just dangerous, it could also be a place of healing.
When they finally reached his cabin, John helped Naeli inside. He made her sit in a sturdy chair while he cleaned her wound properly.
The cabin smelled of pine and wood smoke. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the room. For a kit, and he worked carefully, cleaning the cuts and wrapping them with fresh bandages. Naeli watched him, silent but grateful. Brass.
You're lucky I was nearby, John said softly. This trap could have done much worse if you'd been here alone. Naeli nodded, her hands folded in her lap.
For the first time, she spoke more clearly.
Thank you.
I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come. Her voice was soft but full of sincerity. John felt a strange warmth in his chest. He wasn't used to receiving such gratitude, and it struck him deeply.
After ensuring she was stable, John offered her some food and a warm drink. She accepted quietly, sitting on the edge of the chair.
The two of them didn't speak much at first. There was an unspoken understanding between them. She had survived something terrifying, and he had helped her. The connection was simple but profound, built on trust and survival. As the day went on, John watched Naeli carefully. She was strong, but the bear trap had taken a toll on her physically and emotionally. He decided to give her space while keeping an eye on her, letting her rest and recover. He admired her resilience. Even in pain, she had a quiet strength, a determination that was hard to ignore. By the time evening came, the sun was low in the sky, casting golden light into the cabin.
John prepared a simple meal and sat with Naeli, offering it to her.
She ate slowly, still quiet, but more relaxed. For the first time that day, she smiled. A small, shy smile that lit up her face. John returned the smile, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. He knew the morning had been dangerous, but it had also been a moment that reminded him of the importance of kindness, courage, and the power of helping someone in need. As the night fell, John built a small fire in the hearth and sat nearby, keeping watch over Naeli. She rested quietly, finally able to sleep after the trauma of the trap. John stayed alert, listening to the sounds of the forest outside, the wind rustling the trees, the occasional distant howl of a coyote, and the soft hum of insects in the night. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that for now she was safe. In those quiet hours, John thought about the strange turn of events. He had simply gone for a morning hike, expecting nothing more than the usual calm of the forest. Instead, he had found himself in a life-changing moment, helping a stranger in need. He realized that sometimes life had a way of surprising you, forcing you to step up when it mattered most. And even though the day had been frightening and exhausting, he knew he would remember it forever. The day he saved a life, the day a stranger had trusted him completely, and the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. The morning after John had rescued Naeli, the forest seemed unusually quiet. The sun was just beginning to peek over the hills, painting the trees with soft golden light. John had slept lightly, keeping one ear open for any signs of trouble. He had never expected that a single day could change so much, and yet the events of the previous morning kept replaying in his mind. Nayeli had rested well through the night, and by now her leg was slightly less swollen, though she still needed care. John had prepared a simple breakfast, some bread, fresh fruit, and a little coffee. Braven stopped talking. He carried it to the small table in the cabin, where Nayeli was sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the forest. Her eyes reflected both caution and curiosity, as if she were trying to understand the world outside the place she had always known. John set the food in front of her gently. "Here, you should eat something." "It will help you feel stronger," he said, his voice calm and encouraging. Nayeli nodded, taking a small bite of the bread, then sipping some water. She didn't speak much, but John understood that after the trauma of being trapped, silence was a part of her recovery. As the morning wore on, the peacefulness of the cabin was broken by the distant sound of voices. At first, John thought it might be hunters or hikers passing through the forest, but the tone of the voices was different. There was a firmness, an authority that made him pause. The voices were close now, and as he stepped outside, he saw a small group approaching from the trail. They were not strangers, though John did not recognize them immediately. Their presence carried a weight, a seriousness that made him instinctively aware that something important was about to happen. The group stopped a few feet from the cabin. At their head was an older man, his posture straight and proud, wearing traditional clothing that marked him as an elder of the Apache community. His face was serious, and his eyes were sharp, observing John carefully. Behind him, several other men and women watched closely, their expressions a mixture of concern and expectation.
John felt a sudden tension in the air, realizing that these were Nayeli's people.
They had come to see her, and their approach was not casual. It carried rules, tradition, and authority. Nayeli stood slowly, supporting herself with the help of John's arm. When she saw the group, her eyes widened, and she lowered her gaze respectfully. The elder spoke softly but clearly, addressing her in a language John did not understand. Nayeli responded, her voice steady but quiet. John could tell by the nods and gestures that they were discussing her well-being, her rescue, and her sudden appearance at his cabin. He felt a mix of relief and nervousness. While he had only intended to help, it seemed that helping Nayeli had unexpectedly brought him into a complex situation, one that he did not fully understand. The elder then turned to John, speaking in English with a measured tone. "You saved Nayeli," he said. "For that, we are grateful, but the responsibility for her is not yours alone. You must understand our ways."
John nodded, though he did not fully grasp what was coming.
Ballistic. He listened carefully as the elder explained that according to Apache customs, someone who aids a member of their community in a time of great danger could be asked to take responsibility for them, to protect and care for them. It was not a choice to be taken lightly. It was a serious obligation, tied to respect, honor, and tradition. John felt his chest tighten. He had never expected to be part of such a deep and meaningful custom. He had only wanted to help Nayeli to ensure she was safe. And now it seemed that his actions had carried consequences he could not ignore. The elder's eyes met his, steady and unwavering.
"It is our way,"
he said simply. "You have saved her life. Now you must show your respect through your actions." John swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had always considered himself independent, living alone in the forest, making his own choices. But now he realized that some decisions were larger than personal freedom. They were about honor, trust, and the lives of others. Nayeli remained quiet throughout the conversation, though John could see the subtle signs of her understanding. She had trusted him, and now her people were asking him to extend that trust even further. John could feel her gaze occasionally flicking toward him, a mixture of hope and worry.
He wanted to speak, to explain that he had not expected this, that he was unsure of what he could do.
But the elder continued, and John realized that words alone would not be enough. This was about action, about choosing to respect the customs of a people who had shown both strength and wisdom for generations. The morning passed slowly as John tried to come to terms with what was happening. The elders remained nearby, not aggressive but firm. They observed him closely, watching how he treated Nayeli, how he moved, how he spoke. Every small gesture mattered, and John felt the weight of their eyes, like a physical presence. He realized that this was not just about saving someone from a trap. It was about demonstrating character, integrity, and willingness to step into a role that demanded responsibility beyond himself. During a quiet moment, John stepped aside and spoke with Nayeli privately. "I don't fully understand what's expected of me," he said gently. "I only know that I wanted to help you, and now it seems your people want me to do more."
Not sure what I should do.
Nayeli looked at him, her eyes calm but serious. You helped me when no one else could.
"That is enough for me to trust you," she said softly.
But you must decide if you can honor my people's ways.
It is not about choice alone. It is about respect and responsibility. Her words, though simple, carried a depth that struck John profoundly. He spent the rest of the day learning what he could about the traditions, listening to the elders, and observing their interactions with Nayeli. He realized that the customs were not arbitrary. They were designed to protect, to ensure trust, and to maintain balance within the community. Each gesture, each phrase, each rule carried meaning, and John felt both humbled and challenged. He had always considered himself capable of handling difficult situations. But this was different. This was not a problem he could solve with strength or skill alone. It required understanding, patience, and heart. As the sun climbed higher, John began to see the situation differently. What had started as a simple act of helping someone in need had grown into a lesson about culture, empathy, and human connection. He watched Nayeli, who was regaining her strength slowly, moving with more confidence, and even offering small smiles. She had survived a frightening ordeal, and now she was surrounded by people who cared deeply about her. People whose trust he was being asked to earn. The realization settled on him. This was more than a rescue. It was a bridge between worlds, his own life as a solitary outdoorsman, and the life of a community with traditions far older than he could imagine. By late afternoon, John had made a quiet decision. He would not rush, but he would not refuse either. He needed to understand fully what was expected, to learn the responsibilities, and to act with care. Breath. The elders sensed his sincerity and seemed satisfied with his willingness to listen, even if he had not yet committed. Nayeli, too, watched him, and he could see the relief and hope in her expression. The day had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it was ending with a quiet sense of possibility, a chance to honor trust, to learn, and perhaps to grow in ways he had never imagined. As the forest turned golden with the late afternoon sun, John and Nayeli sat together near the cabin, sharing a quiet meal. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, the wind rustling through the leaves, a distant bird call, the soft trickle of a nearby stream. John felt a new respect for the balance of life here, for the connections that existed between people and the land, and for the lessons that sometimes arrived unexpectedly. He realized that saving Nayeli had not just been about freeing her from a trap. It had been about stepping into a larger story, one filled with responsibility, culture, and the possibility of trust that could change both their lives. The day ended quietly, but John knew it was only the beginning. The elders would return, and the next steps would demand patience, courage, and understanding. Psst. He felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. He had always believed he could handle the challenges of the forest, but this challenge was different. It was human, emotional, and deeply tied to respect and tradition. As night fell, he looked at Naeli, who was now resting more comfortably, and he made a silent promise to do his best, whatever that might mean. For the first time, John understood that helping someone could mean more than physical rescue. It could mean stepping into the unknown, accepting responsibility, and learning to honor the lives and traditions of others. He felt a quiet resolve building within him, a determination to face whatever came next with care, patience, and respect. The forest was still. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, and John knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But he felt ready to meet them, guided by the simple truth that helping someone was never just about action. It was about heart, trust, and honor. The following morning, John woke to the sound of birds calling in the forest. The sunlight streamed through the small windows of his cabin, casting golden patterns on the wooden floor. He felt a strange mix of calm and tension. Calm because Naeli was resting quietly, her legs slowly healing from the trap. Tension because he knew today would be different.
The elders would return, and with them, the expectations and responsibilities that came with their customs.
Round. He had spent the previous day learning, listening, and trying to understand the weight of what was asked of him, but now the reality was approaching, and it felt heavier than he had imagined. Naeli was awake already, sitting on the chair near the window. Her eyes met John's as he entered the small kitchen area. There was a quiet determination in her gaze, a sense that she was ready to face what was coming. But she spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "They will return soon. You must decide what you will do." John nodded, feeling a knot of worry in his stomach. Breath. He wasn't sure he had all the answers, but he knew he couldn't ignore the trust that Naeli had placed in him. Soon enough, the sound of footsteps echoed along the trail. John and Naeli stepped outside and he saw the group approaching. This time, the elders were accompanied by several more members of the community, some young, some old, all watching with careful eyes. The air seemed to thrum with unspoken rules and expectations. John felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. He realized that this was more than a matter of simple gratitude. This was about responsibility, about honor, and about entering a world that had rules far different from the life he had always known. The lead elder, the same man from the previous day, stepped forward. He spoke calmly, explaining again the customs and the responsibilities expected of someone who had saved a member of their community. "It is not enough to act with kindness alone," he said. "Actions must follow through with care, respect, and commitment.
Your choice today will reflect not just on you, but on the bond you have created with Naeli and our people."
John listened carefully, realizing that what seemed simple, helping someone, had far deeper consequences. Naeli stood quietly beside him, her gaze calm but steady.
She seemed to understand that John was struggling with this decision. Though he had helped her, he had not yet fully committed to the responsibility her people expected. She did not push him but waited, giving him space while also trusting that he would act with care. John felt the weight of her trust more strongly than anything else. He had rescued her physically from danger, but now he faced a challenge of the heart and the mind, one that required patience, understanding, and courage. As the morning wore on, John tried to prepare himself. He spent time walking through the forest, thinking about what it meant to accept responsibility for Naeli. The woods that had always been a place of peace now seemed to hum with tension. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, reminded him that the world was larger than he had imagined. The safety of the forest was no longer just about avoiding wild animals or navigating difficult trails. It was about understanding human relationships, trust, and respect for customs that had existed for generations. Trust! By midday, John realized that he could not make a decision lightly. The elders observed him quietly, noting his hesitation and thoughtfulness. Bind. Naeli remained patient, showing her resilience and quiet strength. John knew that whatever he decided would affect not only her life but also his own. He had lived independently for years, free from the obligations of others, but now his freedom was intertwined with someone else's life. He felt a mixture of fear and determination, understanding that true responsibility was never simple or easy.
The day continued with moments of tension. John and Nayeli sat together, and he began asking questions about her community, their customs, and the meaning behind the elders' expectations.
Nayeli answered patiently, explaining that the responsibility was about trust and honor.
It was a promise to protect, care, and respect her, not as a burden, but as a commitment to her well-being and to the traditions that shaped her life.
John listened carefully, absorbing every word, realizing that this was more than a choice. It was a learning experience, a chance to step into a new way of understanding the world.
As the sun moved lower in the sky, the elders gathered around John and Nayeli.
They watched him closely, waiting for a sign that he understood the seriousness of the responsibility. John felt the pressure of their gaze, but also a growing clarity within himself.
He realized that fear and hesitation were natural, but courage was measured by one's willingness to act despite them.
He could not ignore the trust Nayeli had placed in him, nor could he ignore the respect due to her people. Accepting the responsibility was not just about obligation. It was about honor, empathy, and connection.
Where finally John spoke. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded.
"I understand what is expected of me," he said. "I did not anticipate this, and it feels overwhelming, but I will do my best. I will honor your trust and take responsibility for Nayeli. I will protect her, care for her, and respect your customs as best I can." The elders nodded slowly, their expressions serious but approving. Nayeli's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude, and John felt a profound sense of purpose settle over him. Even with his decision made, the challenges were only beginning. John realized that accepting responsibility was more than a promise. It was a daily commitment. He would need to learn the customs, understand the rules, and navigate a world that was deeply intertwined with respect, trust, and community. Every action, no matter how small, mattered.
The forest around him, once a place of simple peace, now carried new meaning. It was a space where responsibility and tradition met, where trust had to be earned and maintained, and where courage was measured not just by survival, but by empathy and respect.
That evening, John and Nayeli sat together outside the cabin, watching the sun set behind the hills. The forest glowed in golden and orange hues, and the quiet hum of nature surrounded them.
Bade. Nayeli spoke softly, telling John more about her life, her family, and the community she belonged to. John listened intently, realizing how much there was to learn and understand. He felt a growing admiration for Nayeli, not just for her strength in surviving the trap, but for her patience, wisdom, and the way she navigated a world filled with rules and expectations. As night fell, the forest became calm and still. John built a small fire near the cabin, the flames crackling softly in the quiet evening. Nayeli sat nearby, her leg resting comfortably after a day of care. John reflected on the events of the day, understanding that the struggle was not over. The journey of responsibility, trust, and cultural understanding had only begun. He felt a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that he would face challenges, make mistakes, and need to learn from them. But he also felt a quiet strength, a sense that he was ready to meet the struggle with patience, courage, and respect. The night passed slowly, but John stayed alert. He kept a careful watch over Nayeli, ensuring her safety and comfort. In the quiet hours, he thought about the unexpected path that life had set before him. He had only intended to help a stranger, but that single act had led to a deeper understanding of trust, honor, and human connection. He realized that struggles were not always about danger or hardship. They could also be about learning, empathy, and stepping into a role that required heart as much as courage. By the time dawn approached, John felt the sense of readiness. The struggles of the day had taught him that responsibility was not something to fear, but something to embrace with care and respect. He looked at Nayeli, who was resting peacefully, and felt a deep sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy, but he knew he could face it with determination. The struggle was not just about him or Nayeli. It was about trust, tradition, and the connections that shaped both of their lives. Breaths. John realized that the true struggle was ongoing, not a single moment or event. It was about every decision, every action, and every choice to act with respect and care. He understood that he was no longer just an outsider in the forest. He was part of a larger story, a story that required patience, empathy, and courage. The day had tested him in ways he could not have anticipated, but it had also prepared him for what was to come. As the sun rose fully, lighting up the forest with a warm glow, John took a deep breath. He knew that the struggle of responsibility would continue, but he also felt ready. The lessons of trust, respect, and care had begun, and he was determined to honor them in every action. Nayeli stirred beside him, and he offered a small smile. They were facing the struggle together, and in that shared journey, John found a sense of purpose and strength he had never known before. The following days were not easy for John. The weight of responsibility he had accepted for Nayeli was heavier than he had expected. Brish. Every morning he woke with a mixture of determination and worry. He knew that saving her from the trap had been only the beginning. Now, he had to prove himself worthy of the trust her people had placed in him, and that meant more than kindness. It meant understanding, patience, and humility. The elders returned regularly, observing how he cared for Nayeli, noting every small action and silently judging whether he could truly honor their traditions. Nayeli's leg was healing, but she still needed constant support. John helped her walk carefully through the forest paths, ensuring she did not stumble or strain herself. He cooked her meals, cleaned her wounds, and tended to her comfort, often sacrificing his own routines and rest to make sure she was safe. He began to feel the strain physically, long days in the forest, limited sleep, and constant attention to her needs. But the harder part was the emotional struggle. He was learning what it truly meant to take responsibility for another person. Every decision mattered. Every moment of care, patience, or hesitation shaped not just her well-being, but the trust between them and the approval of her community. One morning, after helping Nayeli get out of bed and preparing breakfast, John noticed the elder approaching again, accompanied by 2 other men from the community. Their presence always brought a quiet tension, and today John could sense that something serious was about to happen. Nayeli looked at him, calm but concerned. John nodded to her, a silent message of support.
They stepped outside together.
The elder spoke carefully, explaining that the responsibility John had accepted was not just about immediate care. It extended to understanding the deeper aspects of their culture, their family bonds, and the traditions that governed life in the community. John listened intently, though he felt overwhelmed. The rules were complex, layered with meanings that he had only begun to understand. Breathic sense of every action he took would be noticed, every word carefully considered.
It was no longer enough to simply provide for Nayeli. He had to prove himself capable of living in harmony with her community's values.
The pressure weighed on him heavily. He had expected gratitude or perhaps a small acknowledgement of his help, but what he faced now was a profound test of character, patience, and understanding. As the days passed, John felt the struggle growing inside him. He wanted to do everything right, to meet the expectations of Nayeli and her people, but he realized that some of the customs were subtle and unfamiliar. There were moments when he felt frustrated, unsure whether his actions were appropriate or whether he had failed in some way.
Nayeli noticed this and often gave him quiet encouragement, speaking softly about the meaning behind certain gestures or words, guiding him without pushing.
Her patience and wisdom were remarkable. She had endured danger and uncertainty, yet she remained composed, teaching John that strength often lay in calm understanding rather than force. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the forest hills, John felt a sharp pang of doubt. He had spent the day helping Nayeli walk along a narrow trail to gather firewood, ensuring her safety at every step. He had cooked her meals, tended her wounds, and tried to anticipate every need, yet he could not shake the feeling that he was failing in some invisible way, that the elder's watchful eyes had detected some flaw in his efforts. He sat by the cabin, exhausted, running his hands over his face as the tension and fatigue weighed heavily on him. Nayeli approached him quietly, her voice gentle. John, she said softly, you are doing what is needed. You have shown care, patience, and respect. A struggle is part of the process. It is not a failure. It is learning.
Every day you act with honesty and attention, you prove your trustworthiness. Her words were simple but powerful.
John felt both comforted and challenged. He realized that this struggle, the emotional, physical, and mental effort, was necessary. It was the test of his commitment, of his heart, and of his ability to embrace responsibility fully. The next day brought another test. While helping Nayeli walk through the forest to collect herbs for her wound, a sudden misstep caused her to stumble. John reacted immediately, catching her before she fell completely. Her face was pale, and John felt a rush of panic and guilt. Though no real harm was done, he could feel the eyes of the elders on him in his mind. Every mistake, no matter how small, seemed magnified by the responsibility he had accepted. He realized that being responsible for someone's well-being was not just about physical care. It was about emotional readiness, awareness, and constant vigilance. Later that afternoon, John and Nayeli returned to the cabin. He felt drained, but knew the struggle was not over. He had to remain patient, understanding, and attentive, even when fatigue and doubt threatened to overwhelm him. Nayeli noticed his weariness and offered quiet support, helping him understand that true responsibility required both effort and emotional resilience. She did not scold or criticize. Instead, she guided him gently, reinforcing the importance of balance, care, and respect. The elders visited again that evening. Their presence was calm but firm, and John could feel their assessment in every glance. They observed how he interacted with Nayeli, noting his attentiveness, his patience, and his growing understanding of their customs. John felt the weight of their gaze like a physical force. Each day brought a new challenge, a misstep, a question, a need he might overlook. But he also began to notice small successes. Nayeli's trust in him seemed to deepen, and the elder's approval became more apparent, though still subtle. The struggle, he realized, was ongoing and layered, testing not just his actions but his mindset and emotional strength. One night, after a long day of walking through the forest and tending to Nayeli, John sat by the fire alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the bear trap that had started it all, the sudden arrival of Nayeli's people, and the responsibility he had accepted. He understood now that the true challenge was not the initial rescue, it was what came afterward. Caring for someone, respecting their culture, and meeting the expectations of a community required constant attention, reflection, and effort. It was exhausting, yet deeply meaningful. The following morning, John felt the struggle reach a new height. Nayeli had woken early and attempted to walk on her own, testing the strength of her leg. John followed closely, ready to assist, but she stumbled slightly.
Though he caught her without injury, the moment reminded him of the stakes involved.
He realized that each day would bring its own challenges. That responsibility was a living, breathing commitment that could not be paused or ignored. The elder's expectations, Nayeli's trust, and his own conscience combined to create a weight that was sometimes difficult to bear, but also deeply transformative. Through it all, John began to change.
He noticed that his own patience was growing, that his awareness of small gestures, careful words, and attentive actions was sharpening. He learned to listen deeply, not only to Naeli, but also to the subtle cues of her community. He realized that true responsibility was as much about understanding and empathy as it was about physical care.
Every interaction became a lesson, every moment a chance to grow.
The struggle was difficult, but it was shaping him into someone more aware, more compassionate, and more capable than he had ever imagined. By the end of the week, John recognized that the breaking point was not a single moment, but a series of small, cumulative pressures. The exhaustion, the doubt, the need to anticipate every action, and the weight of cultural responsibility. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt, yet he had persisted. Naeli's quiet encouragement, combined with the elder's careful observation, had pushed him to rise to the challenge. He understood now that struggle was not simply hardship. It was growth, learning, and transformation. As night fell and the forest grew quiet, John sat beside the fire, Naeli resting nearby. The struggle had been immense, testing him in ways he could not have foreseen. He had learned patience, empathy, and the importance of careful attention. He had learned that responsibility was not a burden to bear alone, but a shared journey of trust, respect, and care. Though the breaking point had been exhausting, it had also strengthened him, preparing him for the next steps in this unexpected chapter of his life. For the first time, John felt a sense of clarity and resolve. He had faced the struggle head-on, learned its lessons, and emerged with a deeper understanding of himself, Naeli, and the community whose trust he had earned. He realized that the greatest challenges were not always the most obvious. They were often the emotional and mental tests that shaped character, guided choices, and revealed true strength. The days that followed marked a new chapter in John's life. The struggle he had faced while learning the responsibilities toward Naeli and her community had transformed him. Each day he felt himself becoming more aware, more patient, and more connected to a world that he had once only observed from the edges of the forest. He realized that his decision to accept responsibility for Naeli was not just about helping one person. It was about honoring trust, learning about a culture, and discovering his own capacity for care and understanding. Naeli's leg continued to heal steadily, thanks to John's consistent care and attention. She could walk longer distances now without assistance, and her confidence began to grow. They spent their mornings exploring nearby areas of the forest, collecting herbs for minor wounds, and learning about the plants, animals, and hidden springs in the hills. John had always loved the forest, but now he saw it with new eyes. It was not only a place of solitude and beauty, it was also a place of learning, patience, and partnership. Every tree, stream, and clearing became a part of a larger story that connected him to Naeli, her people, and the lessons he was gradually understanding. One morning, as the golden sunlight filtered through the tall pine trees, Naeli and John walked along a narrow trail. She moved carefully, testing her leg, while John remained alert and supportive. Breath. "You have come a long way," he said gently. "I can see that you are stronger each day." Naeli smiled, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and pride.
"It is because of your care," she replied softly.
"But also because of the patience I have learned from my people. You have listened and learned. That is what matters." John felt a deep warmth inside, realizing that their bond had grown beyond simple rescue. It was now built on trust, respect, and shared experience. As the days passed, John began to understand more about the customs and traditions that guided Naeli's community. The elders would visit occasionally, offering guidance, encouragement, and gentle instruction. Pure. John observed carefully, learning the importance of small gestures, respectful words, and mindful actions. He realized that responsibility was not just about protecting someone physically. It was about understanding the world they lived in, honoring their values, and acting with integrity in every situation. Each day brought new lessons. and John felt himself becoming more patient, compassionate, and aware. The connection between John and Naeli grew stronger. Though it was quiet and respectful, they shared stories of their lives, their past experiences, and their dreams for the future.
John learned about Naeli's childhood, her family, and the traditions that shaped her life.
Naeli listened as John spoke about his life in the forest, his cabin, and the solitude he had once cherished. They discovered shared values: love for nature, respect for others, and a desire to protect and care for the world around them. Their bond was built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that trust was a powerful and fragile gift. One afternoon, the elders returned for a longer visit. John and Naeli had spent the morning preparing a simple meal, and when the elders arrived, they were greeted warmly. The elders observed quietly, noting the care, attention, and respect that John had shown in his interactions with Naeli. They asked questions about her recovery, her comfort, and her well-being. John answered honestly, explaining how he had learned to anticipate her needs, to respect her space, and to honor the customs that guided their lives. The elders nodded, showing approval, and John felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. As the evening sun cast long shadows over the forest, John and Naeli sat near the fire, reflecting on the journey they had experienced together. "I never imagined," John said softly, "that helping someone could teach me so much about responsibility, trust, and respect." Naeli looked at him, her eyes calm and steady. "It is not only about the rescue," she replied. "It is about the care that follows, the understanding, and the willingness to learn. You have shown all of that. That is why your actions matter." John felt a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that the lessons he had learned were not only about caring for Naeli. They were about understanding life, culture, and the importance of empathy. Over time, John became more integrated into the community, attending small gatherings, helping with tasks, and learning the ways of the people he had once observed only from a distance. The elders trusted him, Naeli respected him, and he gradually became a part of something larger than himself.
He saw the beauty of tradition, the strength of community, and the way trust could transform relationships.
The forest, once a place of solitude, now became a space of connection, growth, and shared experience. There were still challenges, of course. Life in the forest and the demands of responsibility were not easy. Some days were exhausting, some nights were long, and there were moments of doubt. But John had learned to face these challenges with patience, resilience, and humility. He realized that struggle was part of growth, and that each obstacle was an opportunity to strengthen trust and understanding. Naeli continued to heal and grow stronger, and their partnership became a source of mutual support and encouragement. One morning, as John helped Naeli step carefully along a forest trail, she paused and looked around at the trees, the sunlight, and the quiet beauty of the forest.
"Do you see now," she said softly, "how much we can learn from each other?"
Power, trust, patience, and care can change not only our own lives, but also the lives of those around us. John nodded, feeling a deep sense of realization.
He understood now that the journey had been about much more than a bear trap or a moment of rescue.
It had been about trust, responsibility, empathy, and the power of human connection. By the time the week ended, John had fully embraced the role he had accepted. But he was no longer merely a rescuer or caretaker. He was a trusted companion, a learner, and a participant in the life of a community he had once only observed. The elders' visits became occasions of shared conversation, laughter, and guidance rather than tense evaluations. Naeli's trust in him deepened, and he understood that their relationship had transformed from one of simple rescue to a bond built on respect, care, and shared experience. The day came when Naeli's leg had healed enough for her to move freely without assistance. John helped her stand, and she walked a short distance alone, her steps steady and confident. He felt a sense of pride and relief, knowing that the struggle, the tension, and the effort had all led to this moment of triumph.
Naeli smiled at him, her gratitude shining in her eyes, and John realized that the journey had been as meaningful for him as it had been for her.
That evening, they celebrated quietly by the fire, sharing a simple meal and reflecting on everything that had happened.
John thought about the bear trap, the sudden arrival of Naeli's people, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He understood that life often brought unexpected events, but it was how one responded to those events that defined character. He had learned patience, empathy, courage, and the importance of respecting the lives and traditions of others. Naeli's gentle guidance and the elders' trust had taught him that true responsibility was not a burden. It was an opportunity to grow, connect, and make a positive difference. In the days that followed, John and Naeli continued to explore the forest, care for one another, and strengthen their bond. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. John realized that the forest had become more than a home. It was now a place of shared experience, learning, and connection. He had entered this journey as a solitary observer, and he had emerged as a trusted companion, a learner, and a participant in a life filled with meaning, culture, and human connection. Looking back on the events, John understood that the bear trap had been more than a moment of danger. It had been a turning point. It had set in motion a series of experiences that had challenged him, stretched him, and ultimately transformed him. The struggle, the tension, the uncertainty, and the responsibility had all led to growth, understanding, and a bond that could not have been predicted. He realized that the rescue was only the beginning. The true journey was in the care, respect, and shared learning that followed. John also recognized the profound role of trust. Naeli had trusted him in the moment of danger, and he had reciprocated with care and attention. Her people had tested him, observing whether he could uphold their traditions, honor their expectations, and act with integrity. Through patience, empathy, and determination, John had proven himself, not just to them, but to himself. He had discovered a deeper sense of purpose, a stronger connection to the world around him, and a renewed understanding of what it meant to care for another person fully and respectfully. As the final days of his journey with Naeli in the forest unfolded, John felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had faced the challenges, met the expectations, and learned lessons that would stay with him forever. Naeli's leg had healed, her confidence had returned, and their bond was stronger than ever. The elders' trust had been earned, and John had become part of a community and a story far larger than he had ever imagined. The forest, once a place of solitude, had transformed into a space of connection, learning, and shared growth. John had entered this journey as a man who sought only to help, and he emerged as someone who understood responsibility, trust, and the power of human connection. The experience had taught him that true courage was not just in acts of bravery, but in patience, empathy, and the willingness to embrace responsibility fully. In the golden light of the late afternoon, John and Naeli stood together at the edge of a clearing, looking out at the forest that had been both a place of danger and a place of healing. John took a deep breath, feeling gratitude for the journey, the struggles, and the lessons he had learned. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he felt ready to meet them with patience, respect, and courage. Naeli smiled beside him, and John understood that the journey had changed them both, shaping a bond that would endure, built on trust, care, and shared experience.